Okay guys, so what we've got here is a 96 Honda Civic 1.6 liter. I'm sorry, it's a 97. And it was stopped on the highway, and I got it in. The battery's dead from the flasher, so I charged the battery, and the engine cranks over, no start. So it's a cranking engine, no start. But the engine sounded a little odd. So the first thing I did was I took these 3 screws on the distributor cap loose, and I took the distributor cap off and set it to the side, and I had somebody crank the engine, and I noticed that the rotor right here was not spinning. So that was a clue that that we had a timing belt issue possibly. Now I know they had a timing belt put on this car about 2 years ago, but the other thing I noticed was the dipstick hadn't. So we do have a little bit of concern there. In the meantime, I've taken the 5 bolts that hold the valve cover. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I've got the valve cover off. That was the first step. And then I had to take the power steering pump off. I'll set it back here so you can see. So there's a bolt in the top of the power steering pump right here. And then on the back side, there's an adjuster. Took those 2 bolts out. Took the line off the power steering pump reservoir and set them both to the side. Alright, that exposed the top cover. So I took the 2 bolts that hold the top cover out. There's one here and one here. And then there's a little bit of lip right there on the outside of the cover, if you can see. You got to just kind of wiggle that out. And now the cover is out of the way. So I got the belt off of that. The next thing was a tensioner pulley that sets right down here. If you can see that, there's I took the nut loose that holds this idler pulley on right here. Took the nut loose first, and didn't take it off, but I took it loose, and we're going to set that back on there so we don't do exactly that and lose it. We just did. Took that loose, and then at the top is an adjuster screw. You just screw that out, it loosens the belt. Took the belt off. Then there's 2 bolts. I went ahead and slid the pulley off of the shaft. And then there's 2 bolts that hold that to the block right down here. Pretty easy to get off. Not a real problem at all. That let me get the belt off the air conditioner. Then we went down over here, and on the alternator, right there is 1 bolt. I loosened it up. Kind of hard to see. Actually, it slid over because I just loosened it up. And then once I loosened that, I was able to pull up on that belt, which draws the alternator in, and then that belt is off. Now I've jacked the car up a little bit at this point, and you actually don't have to jack this car up because there was a plastic shield right here that I took loose. 2 little plastic screws, and I took that out of the way. And the next thing I'm going to do is I've got a holder that's going to fit in this hexagon shape right here. If you don't have one, you can go to AutoZone, and it's on their tool rental program. And I'm going to hold that crankshaft while I take that 17mm bolt out of the center. If the crank hasn't been off recently, it's virtually impossible to get that center bolt out without that holding tool. So the holding tool requires a breaker bar to hold it. So you'll need to rent their breaker bar and the holding tool at AutoZone. I'm going to go ahead and pause this video while I get that pulley off. Alright, a little update on the Honda here. I got the crankshaft pulley off. Some of you may not have an impact or a way to get it. I use this little electric impact gun right here, also from AutoZone. They're around 50-60 bucks. I've had mine for a while. Works great for taking tires and wheels off, and it worked great for this crankshaft pulley. Another point I wanted to point to was here on the lower alternator bolt. Now, some of you may not be able to move that alternator as easily as I did, and if that's the case, there's a nut, and you can see the one is missing off of this car, so we're going to have to find a nut for that. You may have to come down here and loosen this nut. Now, you don't really have to worry about holding the backside because I'm pretty sure these Hondas have a square bolt. I don't know if you can see it back here. So when that bolt is in correctly, it can't turn. So you just loosen the nut. In this case, the nut is gone, so we're going to replace that. Next step is we're going to remove this plastic cover here. Now, there are 5 bolts. There's 3 on the forward side of the engine, 1 here, and the rest go up the side. And then there are 2 on the back side of the engine, but there's also a crankshaft sensor right here held on with a 10mm bolt. You want to get that out of the way so you don't damage that sensor. So I'm going to go ahead and take this cover off. From this view here, you can also see that the rubber plug has been removed off of this, and that bolt that you're seeing through that hole up there is the tensioner, timing belt tensioner fastener. So the tensioner slides onto a post, and it's spring loaded, and you know, when you put the belt on, you tighten this engine rotates counterclockwise, so you'll put tension on it counterclockwise, and then that's the bolt you're going to tighten down for the tensioner. So we're gonna come back and edit this video later, but I just wanted to show you that stuff. Okay, so we got the cover off now. I wanted to show you the location of those bolts. So there's one there and one there. Now I think this upper one was already off. I didn't see a bolt there. And then on the front side, you've got one at the bottom, second one about halfway up, and the third one I got from the top side. So now I've got that out, and I can see that the timing belt snapped. So I'm up here, I'm checking the tensioner. It feels great. Water pump feels good. Normally the water pump is the culprit on these. You can see it's the cog gear up there. I'll try to reach it here. Water pump. And so normally when you do a Honda like this, you change the water pump, the tensioner pulley, and the belt all together. They come in a kit at your local auto parts store, and it's real common to replace all 3. As I mentioned earlier, we know that the water pump is fairly new, and the tensioner has also been replaced. So we're still investigating why this belt snapped. And remember, this is the vehicle that was 3 quarts low on oil when it came in. So next thing I'm going to do is go up top. I'm going to pause this for a moment. Okay, so a couple things we're going to do up here. Here's the belt coming out. There's a bracket right here that we're going to take loose in order to get the belt in. But before we do that, we're going to place a jack and a block of wood underneath the engine, because this bracket is what's holding the engine in the car. So we're going to put a jack underneath the engine with a block of wood between the pan and the jack. Then we're going to play around. I'm going to pull the spark plugs out. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with these, but when the spark plugs are out, I'll be able to take a long screwdriver and put down each cylinder. Now, the way these engines work is the two front cylinders come up together, and down together, and the two end cylinders come up and down together. So I'm going to use a long screwdriver as a depth gauge. I'm going to drop it down in the cylinder so that it touches the top of the piston, and I'm going to compare these two cylinders to each other and the two end cylinders to each other. I want to make sure that I've got the same distance from the top of the piston to the top of this tower. I'm a little bit worried that there may be a crankshaft connecting rod damaged, and that'll give me some kind of clue if there is. So that's the next step, and we'll come back and add more to this video. Thanks. Okay, so we took this cruise control out of the way. It was 1, 2, 3 small bolts that held that in, and now we've got that same impact we used to take this mount off. Now we do have the jack under the engine to support it, and hang on, we'll get that loose. One thing about the electric impact, you can't let the cord come undone. Alright, so you saw the motor shift a little bit. Those 3 bolts, we're going to set those aside, or nuts rather. And then this bracket comes right out of the way. And what that does is it gives us access to this air gap here, which is how the timing belt's going to go in. So next I'm going to line up all the pulleys, and then we'll put the timing belt on. Alright, next step, guys. Got the bracket off. You can see the air gap. There's a mark on each side that lines up with an arrow here on this side, and there's another arrow here, and then it says up on the pulley, so that'll be straight up. Down on the crankshaft, the keyway goes straight up in line with the camshaft, and then there's a mark on the top of that cog down there that lines up with the arrow on the block. So after that, I'm going to put the timing belt on. We're going to line up this front side, and all the slack will be on the tensioner side. Alright guys, the next step was I put the timing belt on, and what I did was I slipped it through here where the gap is at from the mount, and I put it on the bottom pulley, and then I put it on the top pulley, and I held my hand up here to keep the tension tight on here, and then I looped it around the water pump and very carefully around that tensioner right down there. And then once I had that on, I slid my crankshaft pulley back on, and I rotated the engine slightly counterclockwise to take up the slack and allow the tensioner to extend. And then I tightened the nut. I don't know if you can see this nut right here on the end of the tensioner. And so tightened that 14mm nut up. And so that's the belt going on. Next I'm going to reassemble this thing and see if it'll fire up before I go any further.